All right. This is another early morning con session. I had one last Sunday, I think. I have one 2 Sundays in a row. Pretty good. And it is the Antinomy of Pure Reason, Section 2, Antithetic of Pure Reason. My understanding is this section is a bunch of examples. I'm going to warn up front. I am going to understand a reason for the examples and how they fit into Kant's overall thesis. I'm not going to drive myself nuts trying to figure out exactly what he's saying in each example. I feel like they might be kind of confusing, and I've heard they're a bit maybe dated, and maybe just tough to penetrate sometimes. So yeah, but we're going to do our best, as we always do. Maybe. Probably not. If any sum total of dogmatic doctrines is called thetic, then I may denote by antithetic not indeed dogmatic assertions of the opposite, but the conflict between different kinds of seemingly dogmatic knowledge. Okay, the conflict between different kinds of seemingly dogmatic knowledge. Thesis cum antithesi. To none of which we can ascribe a superior claim to our assent. Right. And I think this is the whole point of the antinomy. I say antinomy. Antinomy is logical or situations where we have both sides of an issue equally plausible or not plausible. So it is equally true that there must be a beginning to the universe, and equally true that there is not a beginning to the universe. And there's logical reasons that both of those are equally valid. And Kant's going to point out what flaw in our logic and what that causes that to happen, and what we need to be on the lookout for it, etc. Excuse me. It's too long of an explanation. This antithetic, therefore, has nothing to do with one-sided assertions, as you can kind of argue the previous section was, but considers general kinds of rational knowledge only with reference to the conflict with one another that it causes. The transcendental antithetic is in fact an investigation of the antinomy of pure reason, its causes and its results. If we apply our reason, not merely to objects of experience, in order to make use of the principles of the understanding, but venture to extend it beyond the limits of experience, then there arise sophistical doctrines. But venture to extend reason beyond the limits of experience, right? Then there arise sophistical doctrines which may neither hope to be confirmed nor fear to be refuted in experience. Every one of them is not only in itself free from contradiction, but can even point to conditions of its necessity in the nature of reason itself, although unfortunately the assertion opposing it can produce an equally valid and necessary grounds in its support. Okay. It makes sense. That's kind of what we're expecting. The questions which naturally arise in such a dialectic of pure reason are the following: 1. In which propositions is pure reason in which propositions is pure reason inevitably subject to an antinomy? Okay. 2. On which causes does this antinomy depend? 3. Whether and in what way does reason, in spite of this contradiction, find a way to certainty? In what way does reason, in spite of this contradiction? Okay. A dialectical doctrine of pure reason must therefore have this following characteristic to distinguish it from all purely sophistical propositions. Firstly, it must not refer to a gratuitous question such as may be raised only for an arbitrary purpose, but to one which human reason in its natural progress progress must necessarily encounter. Okay. Secondly, such a doctrine, as well as its opposite, carries with itself not merely an artificial illusion which appears once we have insight to it, but a natural and inevitable illusion which, when it deceives us no longer, still continues to delude us, and hence can be rendered harmless, but can never be annihilated. I'll take it easy, Kant. I'm going to take a sip of coffee. The dialectical doctrine will not refer to the unity of the understanding in concepts of experience, but to the unity of reason in mere ideas. Okay. As synthesis according to rules, however, this unity still has to be congruent. Firstly, with the understanding, and yet as absolute unity of this synthesis, it has to be congruent with reason at the same time. Do you understand? Okay. But the conditions of this unity are such that if it is adequate to the unity of reason, then it is too great for the understanding. Or, if it is adequate to the understanding, it is too small for reason. If it is adequate to the unity of reason, then it is too great for the understanding. Right, meaning we reason to the conclusion, but it's actually incorrect. And so it doesn't work with the understanding. Or, if it is adequate to the understanding, it is too small for reason. Okay. Meaning if we have an idea of what the correct answer is, or like the general principle is, but we can't explain it through reason. Hence a conflict must arise which cannot be avoided, do what we will. These sophistical assertions reveal a dialectical battlefield, where the side is always victorious that is allowed to make the attack, and where those are certain to be defeated who are obliged to act on the defensive. Hence vigorous knights, whether fighting for the good or the bad cause, are sure to win their laurels, if only they ensure that they have the right to make the last attack, and are not obliged to withstand a new onslaught of the enemy. We can easily imagine that this arena has often been entered, and that many victories have been won on both sides, but that the last decisive victory is always guarded by the defender of the good cause maintaining his place, by forbidding his opponent ever to carry arms again. As impartial judges, we must take no account of whether it be good or the good or the bad cause which the contestants defend. It is best to let them fight it out between themselves, in the hope that, after they have tired out, rather than injured each other, they may themselves perceive the uselessness of their quarrel, and part as good friends. That sounds nice. This method of watching, or rather provoking, a conflict of assertions, not in order to decide in favor of one or the other side, but in order to find out whether the object of the struggle is not perhaps a mere illusion, which everybody tries to grasp in vain, and which can never be of any use to anyone, even if no resistance had to be overcome. This procedure, I say, may be called the skeptical method. It is totally different from skepticism, a principle of artificial and scientific ignorance, which undermines the foundations of all knowledge in order, if possible, to leave it with nothing trustworthy and secure at all. Sorry, I'm struggling to read. The skeptical method, on the contrary, aims at certainty, because while watching a contest on both sides, is carried out honestly and intelligently, it tries to discover the point where the misunderstanding arises, right? In order to do what is done by wise legislators, namely to derive from the embarrassments of judges in lawsuits information as to what is imperfectly or not quite accurately determined in their laws. The antinomy, which shows itself in the application of laws, is, considering our limited wisdom, the best criterion of the original legislation, nomothetic, and helps to attract the attention of reason, which in abstract speculation does not easily become aware of its errors, to the important points in the determination of its principles. This skeptical method is essential only in transcendental philosophy, while it may be dispensed with in other fields of investigation. It would be absurd in mathematics for there no false assertions can be hidden or rendered invisible, inasmuch as proofs must always be guided by pure intuition and proceed by evident synthesis. In experimental philosophy, a doubt which causes delay may be useful, but at least no misunderstanding is possible that could not be easily removed. And the final means for deciding a question, whether found sooner or later, must always be supplied by experience. Morality, too, can always, or at least in possible experience, produce its principles and their practical consequences in concreto. Okay. And thus avoid the misunderstandings due to abstraction. Transcendental assertions, on the contrary, claiming insight into what is far beyond the field of possible experience, can never produce their abstract synthesis in any a priori intuition, nor can their flaws be discovered by means of any experience. Transcendental reason, therefore, admits of no other touchstone than the attempt to harmonize its conflicting assertions, and hence to let free the unrestrained conflict. Let free an unrestrained conflict develop between them beforehand. This is what we shall now attempt to do. Footnote: the antinomies follow one another according to the order of the transcendental ideas enumerated above. Okay, cool. Alright, the antinomy of pure reason. First conflict of the transcendental ideas. Thesis. I'm not really sure how you're supposed to read it, because it's split into two columns on a single page, which has not been done in the entire book. And it has thesis on one side, and then underneath it in that column it has proof. Then it has antithesis on the other side, and underneath that it has proof. So I think I'm going to read thesis, antithesis, and then the proof for the thesis, and then a proof for the antithesis. Okay, thesis. The world has a beginning in time and is limited also with regard to space. I guess you kind of know what the antithesis is based on that. Antithesis. The world has no beginning and no limits in space, but is infinite as regards both space and time. Alright, the proof of the thesis, which is the world has a beginning in time and is limited also with regard to space. Beginning and limited. Okay. Proof. For if we assumed that the world has no beginning in time, then an eternity has elapsed up to every given point of time. Okay. And therefore, an infinite series of successive states of things must have passed away in the world. The infinity of a series, however, consists in the fact that it can never be completed by means of successive synthesis. Okay. Because it's infinite, so it can never actually be complete. Okay. Hence, an infinite past series of the world is impossible. And a beginning of the world is therefore necessary to condition its existence. Alright. This was what had to be proved first. With regard to the second point, let us assume again the opposite. In that case, the world would be given as... as an infinite whole of simultaneously existing things. now we cannot conceive in any way of the magnitude of the quantum which is not given within certain limits to any intuition, except through the synthesis of its parts. Nor can we conceive of the totality of such a quantum in any way, except through a completed synthesis or through the addition of unit to unit. Okay, so we perceive like a finite amount, and we couldn't conceive the totality of it unless we had some sort of synthesis of everything. In order, therefore, to think the world, which fills all space as a whole, the successive synthesis of parts of an infinite world would have to be looked upon as completed. Right, and he's like talking about determining that the world is infinite or finite, right? So this makes more sense. That is, an infinite time would have to be viewed as having elapsed in the enumeration of all coexisting things. This is impossible. Hence, an infinite aggregate of real things cannot be regarded as a given whole, nor, therefore, as given simultaneously. Hence, it follows that the world is not infinite as regards extension in space, but is enclosed in its limits. Okay, it looks like the next sections are observations on the first antinomy, so I'm going to read the antithesis first. That the world has no beginning, no limits in space, but is infinite. Proof. For let us assume that it has a beginning. Then, it's interesting because in the first one he's like, let's assume it's infinite, and then like poke all the problems in it. And now he's saying, let's assume that it's finite, and let me show why that's stupid. Then, as beginning is an existence which is preceded by a time in which the thing is not, it would follow that a time must have preceded in which the world was not, that is, an empty time. In an empty time, however, it is impossible that anything should take its beginning. Because of such a time, no part, as compared with any other, possesses any distinguishing condition of existence rather than non-existence. Right, okay. Whether the thing is supposed to arise by itself or through another cause. Hence, through many a series of things Hence, though many a series of things may take its beginning in the world itself can have no beginning, and is so infinite with respect to past time, with regard to the second, or is infinite with respect to past time. Sorry. With regard to the second point, let us start by assuming the opposite, namely that the world is finite and limited with respect to space. In that case, the world would exist in an empty space that is not limited. We should therefore have not only a relation of things in space, but also of things to space. Right, meaning if that's true, then like effectively things would be something you could compare to space, not just compare within space. If it was finite, if that makes sense. As, however, the world is an absolute whole, W-H-O-L-E, outside of which no object of intuition and therefore no correlate of the world can be found. Therefore, the relation of the world to empty space would be a relation of it to no object. Such a relation, however, and with the limitation of the world by empty space, is nothing. And therefore, the world is not limited at all with regard to space. That is, it is infinite with respect to extension. Okay. There's a footnote. Space is merely the form of outer intuition, formal intuition, and not an actual object that can be externally intuited. Space as prior to all things which determine it, fill or limit it, or rather, which give us an empirical intuition in accordance with its form, is, under the name of absolute space, nothing but the mere possibility of outer appearances, insofar as they either exist in themselves or can be added to given appearances. Empirical intuition, therefore, is not a composite of appearances and space. Right. It's just like for the space is the underlying form, as Kant's position. And therefore it's not like space plus, tennis ball equals, tennis ball. It's just like tennis ball is there, and space is a necessary precondition for the tennis ball. The one is not a correlate of the other in synthesis, but the two are connected as matter and form in one and the same empirical intuition. If we try to separate one from the other and to posit space outside of all appearances, we arrive at a number of empty determinations of outer intuition, which, however, are not possible perceptions. For instance, the world's motion or rest in an infinite empty space, that is, a determination of the relation of the two at each other, which can never be perceived, and which is therefore nothing but the predicate of a mere thought entity. Okay. Let's do observations on the first antinomy, on the thesis. In exhibiting these conflicting arguments, I have not tried to employ mere sophisms for the sake of what is called special pleading, which takes advantage of the opponent's lack of caution, and gladly allows his appeal to a misunderstood law in order to establish his own illegitimate claims on the refutation of that law. Every one of our proofs has been drawn from the nature of the case, and no advantage has been taken from the wrong conclusions of dogmatists on either side. I might have seemingly proved my thesis also by putting forward, as is the habit of dogmatists, a defective concept of the infinity of a given magnitude. Excuse me. I might have said that the magnitude is infinite if no greater magnitude, that is, greater than the multitude of a given unit contained in it, is possible. Right. Like, meaning infinite is the largest of the possible things. Like, it's bigger than the next biggest possible thing. Type of thing. As no multitude is the greatest, because one or more units can always be added to it. That's a better way of putting it. I might have argued that an infinite given magnitude, and therefore also an infinite world, infinite as regards both the past series and extension, is impossible, and therefore the world is limited in both respects. I might have followed this line in my proof, but my concept of the infinity of a given magnitude would not have agreed with what we mean by an infinite whole. W-H-O-L-E. We do not represent through this concept how great the whole is, and so the concept of it is therefore also not the concept of a maximum. Rather, we think through this concept only the relation of this whole to any assumed unit, in regard to which is greater than any number. According to whether this unit is taken either greater or smaller, the infinite would be greater or smaller, while infinity, since it consists merely in the relation to this given unit, would always remain the same. Okay, yeah. Meaning infinite space is infinite. It doesn't change based on, like, the existence of something smaller plus 1. The absolute magnitude, that's one way for us to conceptualize it as like the biggest thing you can imagine, plus 1 unit, and then plus 1, you know what I mean? But that's not really how it works. Maybe. The absolute magnitude of the whole would not therefore be known through this concept, nor indeed knowing this magnitude what concerns us, nor indeed is knowing this magnitude what concerns us here. The true transcendental concept of infinity is this, that the successive synthesis of units in measuring a quantum can never be completed. Hence it follows with perfect certainty that an eternity of actual and successive states cannot have elapsed up to a given the present moment. Okay, yeah. And that the world must therefore have a beginning. And I think I talked about this last time. It was last night when I recorded it, but I can't remember. At least I don't think it was this episode, but like one idea of like the current is like is considering like all the individual parts that constitute it. And if there has I think the point he's making is like there must be some finite number of parts that constitute the current, and therefore the world must have a beginning. Because like the example I use, like 1 to 1,000, like we're currently at 1,000, and if we're at 1,000, that's the current existence. Then it must include 1 through 999 in it. But when we get to 0, it's kind of like separate and apart from the current. Like it's just different. And I think what he's saying is the current 1,000 like has to be a finite thing. Because it can't just keep going forever. Well, that kind of just makes up the argument, or gives up the core premise, or assumes it, I guess. Let me read it again. The true transcendental concept of infinity is this, that the successive synthesis of units in measuring a quantum can never be completed. Hence, it follows with perfect certainty that an eternity of actual and successive states cannot have elapsed up to a given, the present moment. Okay. And that the world must therefore have a beginning. Okay, yeah. With regard to the second part of the thesis, the difficulty of the infinite and yet elapsed series does not arise. Okay, that's not an issue for the second part. For the manifold of a world that is infinite with respect to extension is given simultaneously. Right, it's not time. Like time has to like march forward, and you have all those previous units in time that could constitute the present. And since there can't be infinite of them, there must be a point at which they started happening and accruing. But that's not the same for space, because like space, the infinite space occurs all at one time. Supposedly. But in order to think the totality of such a multitude, as we cannot appeal to those limits which of themselves constitute this totality in intuition, we must account for a concept which in our case cannot proceed from the whole to the determinate multitude of the parts, but has to demonstrate the possibility of a whole through the successive synthesis of the parts. Okay? Since such a synthesis would constitute a series that can never be completed. Oh, meaning if we were to go count all the whatever, I'm about to sneeze. Damn it. I lost it. I shouldn't have said it. Meaning, just like we went back in time to try to count all of the things, like, since infinite things, instances, going back and synthesizing them is impossible. In the same sense, if you were to at present be like, I'm going to go count all of the things in the world and all of the units of space, since you wouldn't be able to do that, that's an impossibility. It must be that the world is infinite. Kind of silly. A little silly. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I'm just misunderstanding something. That's probably it. It is impossible to think a totality prior to this synthesis, and hence also by means of it. For the concept of totality itself is, in this case, the representation of a completed synthesis of the parts. Okay. But such a completion, and therefore also its concept, is impossible. I'm not sure I buy that argument. Just because, like, I don't know. I think you could use just the same thing with numbers. Like, okay, numbers are infinite since you can't count them all. And it's like, oh, okay, I suppose that's definitionally true, but it doesn't satisfy. I don't know. Yeah, I guess that kind of works. Okay, sorry, I'm going to just keep moving. Remember, focus on form, not necessarily the content here. Like the type of arguments he's making and stuff. 2. Observations on the antithesis. The proof of the infinity of the given series. Why did he have to structure this like this? Can he just put this after? I guess maybe you want to compare them or something. The proof of the infinity of the given series of the world and the sum total of the world rests on the fact that in the opposite case, an empty time and likewise an empty space would form the limits of the world. Now I am quite aware that people have tried to escape from this conclusion by saying that a limit of the world as regards to both time and space is quite possible, without our having to admit an absolute time before the beginning of the world or an absolute space extending outside the real world, both of which are impossible. Okay. I have nothing to say against the latter part of this opinion held by the philosophers of the school of Leibniz. Space is only the form of outer intuition, and not a real object that could be outwardly intuited, nor is it a correlate of appearances, but the form of appearances themselves. Space, therefore, cannot exist absolutely by itself, as something determining the existence of things, because it is no object at all, but only the form of possible objects. Things, therefore, as appearances, do indeed determine space. So he's agreeing with Leibniz on this. That is, impart reality to one another, to one or other of all its possible predicates, magnitude and relation. But on the contrary, space as something self-subsistent cannot determine the reality of things in regard to magnitude or shape, because it is nothing real in itself. Right. Things just exist in space. Space is the underlying form. Okay. Space, therefore, whether full or empty. Footnote. It is easily seen that what we wish to say is that empty space, insofar as it is limited by appearances, that is, empty space within the world, at least, does not contradict transcendental principles, and may therefore, as far as they are concerned, be admitted. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think we're worried about that. Let me restart this sentence. Oh, it's not that bad. Space, therefore, whether full or empty, can be limited by appearances. But appearances cannot be limited by empty space outside them. The same applies to time, but granting all this, it cannot be denied that we should be driven to admit these two non-entities, empty space outside and empty time before the world, if we assumed a limit of the world, whether in space or time. Okay. For as the plea... Wow, voice is cracked. It's pretty early. Coffee does not make my voice feel very good. And that's all I'm drinking right now. I don't care. For as to the plea by which people try to escape from the conclusion that if the world has limits in time or space, then the infinite void must determine the existence of real things, as far as their magnitude is concerned, it is really no more than a disguised attempt at putting some knowledge, some unknown intelligible world, in the place of our world of sense, and an existence in general that presupposes no other condition in the world, in the place of a first beginning, an existence preceded by a time of non-existence, and boundaries of the cosmic whole in the place of the limits of extension. And thus one gets rid of time and space, but we have to deal here only with the mundus phenomenon and its magnitude, and we cannot abstract from the conditions of sensibility without annulling the very essence of the phenomenal world. The world of sense, if it is limited, lies necessarily in the infinite void. Okay. If we ignore this void, and with it space in general, as an a priori condition of the possibility of appearances, then the whole world of sense vanishes. Okay. This world alone, meaning if we don't consider space and time, probably mostly space, I think he's talking about, in our world, then it disappears. At least our world of sense, and kind of nothing. Okay. Makes sense. This world alone, I guess, would just be empty, but it wouldn't be empty in Kant's. It wouldn't exist in Kant's opinion. Okay. This world alone is given to us in our inquiry. The mundus intelligibilis is nothing but the universal concept of a world in general, in which abstraction is made from all conditions of its intuition, and in reference to which, therefore, no synthetic proposition, whether given affirmative or negative, is possible. Oh man, okay. I kind of lost the thread there. I'm going to restart half a page back. For as to the plea by which many people try to escape from the conclusion that if the world has limits in time or space, these sentences are so long, then the infinite void must determine the existence of real things. Okay. As far as their magnitude is concerned, it is really no more than a disguised attempt at putting some unknown intelligible world in place of our world of sense, and an existence in general that presupposes no other condition in the world in the place of a first beginning, an existence preceded by a time of non-existence, and boundaries of the cosmic whole in place of the limits of extension. Okay, I think what he's saying is it would be, people argue that it would be weird that if my little pen here, coffee, if its magnitude were determined by an infinite space. It's a very small, finite thing, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But Kant's saying, okay, well, that's saying that some unidentified noumena, essentially. Well, I guess it wouldn't be noumena. I tried to use something smart, and it didn't work. It would just be this vast, unending, infinite space is determining these very small things that are outside, that are way outside of our potential realm of sense experience would be kind of strange. Okay. And thus one gets rid of time and space. Oh, I should have ended that sentence. I guess it would be a little... I don't know if it would make more sense with time. Meaning time stretching back to infinity is informing the possibility of this current time. I don't know. But we have here We have to deal here with only the mundus phenomenon. I would imagine this is the things that occur in the world type of thing, but I shouldn't assume that. And then the other thing was like intellectual phenomenon. So let's look at 47. Oh man, they have different. I wish they just had one section of footnotes that went from 1 to like 500. I guess they don't want to put triple-digit footnote numbers. Yeah, they're all broken up into 2-digit. Oh no, here's some triple digits. Anyway. So I gotta find my specific page range. Here it is. And it's 46. No, it's 47. Phenomenal world. World of appearance. Then mundus intelligibilis is intelligible world. Okay, world of appearance. That's kind of what I thought. But we have to deal here only with the mundus phenomenon and its magnitude, and we cannot abstract from the conditions of sensibility without annulling the very essence of the phenomenal world. The world of sense, if it is limited, lies necessarily in the infinite void. If we ignore this void, and with it space in general, as an a priori condition of the possibility of appearances, then the whole world of sense vanishes. This world alone is given to us in our inquiry. Okay. Meaning if we ignore the infinite for determining things within it, we effectively ignore everything, especially space as an a priori condition of the underlying appearances. Okay. The mundus intelligibilis, intelligible world, is nothing but the universal concept of a world in general, in which abstraction is made from all conditions of its intuition, and in reference to which, therefore, no synthetic proposition, whether affirmative or negative, is possible. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to stop here for now. That's just the first, I guess it's the intro and the first conflict. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what, I thought that it would be a little, the parables would be a little cleaner as, this is the reason. I don't know. This is the logical pitfall, the specific one for each one. And, the thesis and antithesis, demonstrated very well because, one side is I don't know. I thought it'd be a little cleaner. I guess I shouldn't have expected that, but, because I'm not exactly, I was considering attempting to break this down into what I guess I should. The first one, the first thesis, the world has a beginning in time and is limited also with regard to space. I think the argument structure was effectively if it continued on infinitely, that wouldn't make sense because things are chopped up into bits and included in a current synthesis of either space or time. And so if they went on infinitely, then you couldn't have a current space or time as we understand it. Is kind of my understanding of the elevator pitch for the argument. Then antithesis, the world has no beginning, no limits in space, but is infinite and regards both time and space. And I think I get the time part of this. If time had a start at some point, then stuff existing outside of it would be just totally illogical. And where would it exist if it's outside of time? And then at what point is time introduced? That also doesn't make any sense. But the space one is way more confusing to me because I think one of the things, which I suppose is the opposite of the finite number of synthesis argument, which is I lost it. Space is infinite and you can't include. Well, it kind of sounds similar. Well, no, I'm getting confused. No, I guess it would be like the space plus one argument, where it's like, okay, if you have to find a stop, you can't really do that. It's like illogical. And so like finding a stop where you can count all of the things in the world or in the universe is stupid. So yeah. I guess I was not expecting the arguments to necessarily be cleaner, but like his explanation of like the logical, like the reasoning flaw to be a little bit cleaner. But yeah, we'll keep going on the second conflict next time.